When you think about network security as a beginner, it is easy to treat controls like a shopping list of devices and features. But strong network defense starts with a different question. What threats are you trying to reduce? And how do specific controls interrupt those threats? Selecting network controls is not about collecting the most tools, because tools overlap, budgets are real, and complexity can create new risk. It is about choosing controls that work together to limit exposure, reduce attacker movement, and create visibility into what is happening. Three foundational control families show up again and again because they map to how networks work: segmentation, which limits where traffic can go; filtering, which decides what is allowed or blocked; and inspection, which examines traffic or behavior to identify suspicious activity. These three families are closely related, but they are not interchangeable, and the best results come from understanding their differences and using them intentionally. For brand new learners, it helps to imagine the network as a set of roads, checkpoints, and patrols, where segmentation changes which roads exist, filtering controls who can pass through checkpoints, and inspection checks whether the travelers and cargo look suspicious. Once you have that mental picture, you can select controls with a clearer sense of why each one matters. Threats in networks often follow predictable patterns even when the specific attack details change, which is why these control families remain useful. Attackers commonly seek an entry point, then they try to move laterally to reach more valuable systems, and then they try to perform actions like credential theft, data access, or disruption. Segmentation is especially powerful against lateral movement because it reduces the number of paths an attacker can take once inside. Filtering is powerful at the boundaries of segments because it can block or restrict the specific traffic types that attackers need. Inspection is powerful because it can detect suspicious patterns that filtering alone cannot capture, such as subtle command and control behavior or unusual data flows. Beginners sometimes assume that if you block enough traffic you are safe, but attackers often use allowed traffic in unusual ways, which is why inspection is needed. Conversely, beginners sometimes assume that detection is enough, but detection without segmentation and filtering can allow rapid spread and large damage before a response can contain it. Selecting controls is therefore about balancing prevention and detection across realistic threat paths. The goal is to create friction for attackers while keeping legitimate traffic flowing predictably. Segmentation, at a high level, means dividing the network into parts so that not every system can talk to every other system by default. The reason segmentation matters is that connectivity is both a business enabler and a security risk. When everything is connected, an attacker who compromises one system can often reach many others, and each reachable system becomes another opportunity. Segmentation limits that opportunity by creating boundaries that require explicit permission for traffic to cross. For beginners, a useful way to think about segmentation is compartmentalization on a ship, where walls and doors prevent a leak in one area from flooding the whole vessel. In networks, those doors are enforced by filtering rules and identity controls, but the architectural idea begins with separating systems by function and trust level. You might separate user devices from servers, public-facing systems from internal systems, and sensitive databases from general application zones. The beginner misconception to avoid is believing segmentation means total isolation, because complete isolation can break business processes and lead to exceptions that undermine the design. Instead, segmentation is about purposeful connectivity, where each cross-boundary connection exists for a reason and is controlled. Segmentation can be applied in different ways, and the differences matter for how threats are reduced. Coarse segmentation divides the network into a few broad zones, which can be easier to manage and still provides a meaningful reduction in attack spread. Fine segmentation, often called microsegmentation, aims to restrict traffic at a much more detailed level, sometimes down to individual workloads or applications. Fine segmentation can reduce lateral movement dramatically, but it requires strong understanding of application flows and strong operational discipline to avoid breaking legitimate communication. For beginners, the key is not to memorize terminology, but to understand the trade-off between precision and complexity. More precision can reduce risk, but more complexity can increase misconfiguration risk and maintenance overhead. A thoughtful approach often begins with coarse boundaries that address the largest risks. then becomes more precise as the organization learns its own traffic patterns. Segmentation also works best when it is aligned with asset value, because the highest value assets deserve the strongest containment. When you place critical systems in tighter segments, you make it harder for attackers to reach the most damaging targets. Filtering is the next family, and filtering means deciding which traffic is allowed or denied based on rules. Filtering can be applied at many points, such as between segments, at the network edge, or near sensitive resources. The reason filtering matters is that most attacks require network communication at some stage, whether it is reaching a vulnerable service, moving laterally, or sending data out. A filter that blocks unnecessary inbound access can remove an entire class of attack opportunities, and a filter that limits outbound communication can reduce the ability of malware to reach external infrastructure. For beginners, it is helpful to understand that filtering is most effective when it is specific and minimal, allowing only what is needed rather than trying to block bad things after the fact. This is often described as an allow-list approach, where only known required traffic is permitted, but the underlying idea is simply least privilege for network flows. A beginner misunderstanding is to treat filtering rules as static forever, but real environments change, which means filters need review and adjustment to remain both secure and functional. When filtering is neglected, rules can become overly permissive to avoid breaking things, and that drift reopens pathways that segmentation was supposed to limit. Filtering decisions can be based on different types of information, and understanding the difference helps you choose the right control for the threat. Basic filtering might use addresses and ports, which can be effective for controlling which services are reachable. More advanced filtering can incorporate identity, device posture, or application-level context, which can be more resilient when addresses change or when users connect from many locations. For beginners, the important point is that filtering becomes stronger when it is tied to stable concepts like identity and function rather than to fragile concepts like fixed addresses. Another important point is that filtering can be directional, meaning inbound rules and outbound rules are both relevant. Many beginners focus only on blocking inbound attacks, but outbound control matters because compromised systems often need to communicate outward for command and control or data exfiltration. Filtering also supports containment during incidents, because if you can tighten rules around a compromised segment quickly, you can limit spread while investigation continues. So filtering is not only a preventative layer, it is also a response lever. When chosen thoughtfully, filters enforce the segmentation design and reduce the number of ways threats can progress. Inspection is the third family, and inspection means examining traffic or behavior more deeply to identify suspicious patterns or policy violations. The reason inspection matters is that many attacks use allowed pathways, such as standard web traffic, email protocols, or legitimate administrative tools. Filtering based only on ports or addresses may allow those pathways, which means an attacker can blend into normal traffic. Inspection can look at content, such as the payload of a connection, or it can look at metadata and behavior, such as unusual destination patterns, unusual volumes, or unusual timing. For beginners, it helps to see inspection as the difference between checking a ticket at a gate and actually looking in a bag for prohibited items. The more you inspect, the more you can detect, but inspection also has trade-offs, such as cost, performance impact, and privacy concerns. Encryption also affects inspection because encrypted traffic cannot be read without special arrangements, which changes what inspection can do. Thoughtful inspection therefore focuses on high-value areas and high-risk flows, rather than attempting to inspect everything equally. Inspection is most powerful when it is paired with clear detection goals, because otherwise you collect observations without knowing how to act on them. Inspection can support different security outcomes, and beginners benefit from distinguishing detection, policy enforcement, and investigation support. For detection, inspection might surface signs of malware communication or unusual protocol usage, helping analysts respond earlier. For policy enforcement, inspection might identify prohibited applications or risky behaviors, allowing the organization to enforce rules about acceptable use or data handling. For investigation support, inspection records can provide evidence, such as connection histories and transaction details, that help reconstruct what happened during an incident. The beginner misunderstanding to avoid is thinking inspection always means reading all content, because in many environments content inspection is limited, and useful detection can still be done using metadata and behavioral analytics. For example, the pattern of destinations contacted, the frequency of connections, and the volume of data transferred can all be meaningful. Inspection also requires careful tuning, because overly sensitive inspection rules can generate noise and lead to alert fatigue. When inspection is tuned and aligned to real threats, it becomes a strong complement to segmentation and filtering, adding the visibility needed to confirm whether blocked or allowed traffic is behaving safely. Selecting controls for threats means mapping each control family to specific threat objectives and thinking through how the families reinforce each other. If the threat is lateral movement after a compromised endpoint, segmentation limits reachable targets, filtering blocks unnecessary cross-segment services, and inspection detects unusual authentication or connection patterns that might indicate an attacker probing boundaries. If the threat is exposure of public-facing services, segmentation isolates those services from critical internal zones. Filtering restricts inbound access to only required ports and protocols, and inspection detects exploitation attempts or unusual traffic bursts. If the threat is data exfiltration, segmentation limits access to sensitive data stores. Filtering restricts outbound connections and access paths, and inspection detects unusual data transfer patterns or suspicious destinations. Beginners sometimes want a single control that solves a threat, but real threats are interrupted by layers. Each control family reduces risk in a different way, and the combined effect is stronger than any single tool. This layered design also reduces reliance on perfect detection, because even if inspection misses something, segmentation and filtering can still limit impact. The selection process is therefore about building a coherent set rather than picking favorites. A practical selection principle that helps beginners is to prefer controls that reduce attack surface first, because reducing what is reachable is often more reliable than trying to detect every bad action. Segmentation and filtering are strong attack surface reducers because they remove unnecessary paths and services. Inspection then becomes more effective because it can focus on the remaining pathways that are actually needed, rather than trying to watch everything. Another selection principle is to design for normal operations, because controls that constantly break legitimate work will be bypassed or weakened over time. That means understanding business flows and building rules that support them, while still restricting everything else. A third principle is to protect the highest value assets with the strongest boundaries, because the most damaging outcomes usually involve a smaller set of critical systems. For beginners, these principles help you avoid the trap of security theater, where controls exist but do not meaningfully reduce risk. Controls should be measurable in terms of what they prevent, what they detect, and how they limit impact. When you select controls with these principles, the network becomes harder to abuse and easier to defend. It is also important to address beginner misunderstandings about what these controls can and cannot do. Segmentation does not stop initial compromise by itself, because an attacker can still exploit a vulnerable system inside a segment, but it can prevent the compromise from spreading widely. Filtering can block known pathways, but if rules are too permissive or if attackers use allowed protocols, filtering alone may not detect the threat. Inspection can detect suspicious behavior, but it often produces probabilities rather than certainty, and it requires good data and careful tuning. Another misunderstanding is that deploying a control means the job is done, but controls drift as environments change, which is why maintenance and review are essential. A control that was correct last year can become wrong this year as applications change, remote work patterns evolve, or cloud usage expands. For beginners, the key lesson is that network controls are part of an operational program, not a one-time installation. Selecting controls thoughtfully includes planning for who owns them, how rules are reviewed, and how exceptions are managed. Without that operational plan, even well-chosen controls can slowly lose effectiveness. Finally, selecting network controls should also consider how you will prove they are working, because confidence without evidence leads to fragile security. For segmentation, proof might include showing that sensitive systems are not reachable from general user zones except through specific allowed pathways. For filtering, Proof might include demonstrating that only required services are exposed and that denied attempts are logged and reviewed. For inspection, proof might include showing that detection rules produce actionable alerts and that investigations have the evidence needed to confirm or dismiss concerns. Proof matters because it supports tuning, and tuning is how you reduce noise without creating blind spots. It also matters because it helps justify the controls to stakeholders, since network security can affect performance and usability. For beginners, proof is what turns architecture into reality. You can say you have segmentation, filtering, and inspection, but if you cannot show that the rules are enforced and that the monitoring is effective, you are relying on assumptions. A mature selection process, therefore, includes not just choosing controls, but choosing measurable outcomes and verifying them over time. When you bring everything together, selecting network controls for threats is about building a layered system that matches how attackers move and how the business needs to operate. Segmentation reshapes the network so compromise cannot easily spread and critical systems are protected by meaningful boundaries. Filtering enforces those boundaries by allowing only the traffic that has a clear purpose, reducing attack surface and supporting containment. Inspection adds visibility and detection by analyzing traffic and behavior for suspicious patterns that would otherwise blend into normal operations. These families reinforce each other, making detection more focused and making prevention more reliable, while also supporting faster investigation when something slips through. For a brand new learner, the most important takeaway is that network security is not one device and not one rule. It is a set of deliberate choices that limit unnecessary connectivity, enforce necessary connectivity safely, and watch the remaining pathways closely enough to respond with confidence. When you select and place controls in this way, you reduce risk in a way that is practical, explainable, and maintainable over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.